Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories. Night Fire in Guadalcanal. It started with a whisper of wind rustling the thick canopy above us, a deceptive quiet that masked the violence lurking in the shadows. Guadalcanal was like that. One moment, nothing but the distant call of some unseen jungle creature. The next, an eruption of fire and steel that swallowed the night whole. My name is Sam Carlson, and if you've never been in a fight where the dark itself seemed to claw at you, where the very air was thick with the stench of sweat, gunpowder, and fear, then let me tell you about the night I saw the world split open. We were dug in along a ridgeline near the Guadalcanal River, a patch of dirt and mud that we'd come to call home, though no sane man would ever want to stay there longer than he had to. The Japs had been hitting us in waves, testing our defenses, never enough to break us but always enough to remind us that they were out there, waiting. It was sometime past midnight when the first shot cracked through the stillness, a single rifle report that sent a jolt through my spine. It came from the far side of the perimeter, near the line where 1st Platoon had set up. A second later, the jungle erupted. Machine guns spat fire, and the night came alive with the glow of tracers streaking through the trees like fireflies on a death march. The enemy wasn't attacking in full force yet, just probing, but we knew what that meant. It was only a matter of time before the real push came. My hands found my rifle instinctively, the wood worn smooth by days of sweat and grime. My squad was already up, eyes wide, muscles tight. No words needed. We knew what to do. The first figures appeared in the darkness, shadows moving against shadows, barely visible until the muzzle flashes lit their faces for an instant, grim, determined, unflinching. They were close. Too close. I squeezed the trigger, felt the familiar kick of my M1 Garand, and watched one of them drop. Another stepped over him without hesitation. That's the thing about fighting in the dark. You don't have time to think about what you're doing. You just react, or you die. Somewhere to my right, a mortar round landed with a deafening roar, the shockwaves slamming into my chest like a hammer. Dirt and debris rained down, and for a moment, I couldn't hear a damn thing except the ringing in my ears. When my vision cleared, I saw something that sent a chill through my bones. The jungle wasn't just moving. It was crawling. They were everywhere. I barely had time to register it before someone screamed, a wet, gurgling sound that told me all I needed to know. A Jap had gotten into the trench. I turned, saw the glint of a bayonet swinging toward me, and threw myself back just as the blade slashed the air where my throat had been a second earlier. I hit the mud hard, my rifle slipping from my hands. He was on me in an instant, his weight pressing down, his breath hot and ragged against my face. I reached blindly, fingers closing around something cold and hard, my trench knife. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I drove it up under his ribs, felt the blade sink deep, felt the shudder of his body as the fight drained out of him. His hands loosened, his weight sagged, and then he was gone, slipping off me like a bad dream. I sucked in a breath, my pulse hammering. The fight was still raging around me, but for that one moment, it was just me and the darkness, the stink of blood and sweat thick in my nose. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep guttural roar that didn't belong to any man. I turned toward the jungle, my heart pounding. Something was coming. Something worse. And we weren't ready. The jungle breathed around us, thick and humid, pressing in like a living thing. The gunfire had died down to sporadic bursts, but we all knew better than to think it was over. This was just the pause before the next wave. I wiped the sweat from my eyes, my hands still slick with blood, some mine, some not. Somewhere behind me, one of our guys was moaning low and pained, the kind of sound a man makes when he knows he's not walking away from this. I forced myself to focus. The dead Jap beside me was already cooling, his glassy eyes staring at nothing. I searched his pockets quickly. Orders, maps, anything that might tell us what the hell they were up to. Nothing. Just a few crumpled notes, a tin of rice crackers, and a blood-stained photograph of a woman and a baby. I hesitated, then shoved it back into his jacket. No time for ghosts. Carlson, a sharp whisper, cut through the dark. I turned to see Corporal Reeves crouched low, his face the mask of mud and exhaustion. They're moving again. Listen. I held my breath. At first, I heard nothing but the distant rumble of artillery miles away. But then there. A rustle, barely more than a whisper, but wrong. Too measured, too controlled. The bastards were creeping forward, using the jungle like a damn cloak. Positions, Reeves rasped. The men shifted, rifles up, safeties off. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made your skin itch and your gut tighten. Then the world exploded. Grenades sailed in first, popping like distant firecrackers before the shockwaves rolled over us, shaking the ground and sending showers of dirt into the air. I barely had time to duck before the first muzzle flashes lit up the trees. The Japs came screaming this time. No more quiet, no more stealth, just raw, violent force. I fired into the dark, my shots lost in the roar of battle. Shapes moved fast between the trees, ducking low, weaving like ghosts. I saw one drop as my bullet caught him high in the chest, but there were always more. My rifle kicked, spit fire, cycled again. The brass casings hit the mud like rain. To my left, McNeil went down hard, a bayonet buried deep in his gut. He didn't even scream, just let out a choked gasp before collapsing into the trench. I swung my rifle like a club, caught the Jap across the jaw, and felt the sickening crunch of bone. He fell back, dazed, and I finished him before he could get back up. Somewhere in the madness, I heard Reeves bellowing orders, trying to keep us from being overrun. It was chaos pure and simple, a whirlwind of blood and fire. The jungle pulsed with flashes of orange and red, casting twisted shadows that danced like demons. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The enemy melted back into the trees, leaving behind only their dead and dying. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. My hands were shaking as I reached for another clip, my breath ragged, my head pounding. But I knew one thing for damn sure. They weren't done, and neither were we. The jungle was never truly quiet, not even after a fight like that. The trees still whispered in the night breeze, insects still hummed, and somewhere in the distance, the slow, deliberate croak of a bullfrog cut through the heavy air. But beneath all of that, beneath the natural sounds of the island, there was something else. Something wrong. We all felt it. I was kneeling beside McNeil's body, pressing my palm against the cooling skin of his neck, even though I already knew. He was gone. Just like that. 1 minute, he was laughing about the can of peaches he'd swiped from supply, and now he was just another piece of the jungle floor, another body left behind. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached for his dog tags. Someone would want them. Someone would need to know. The men moved like shadows, checking their weapons, replacing spent clips, gathering what little we could from the dead. The Japs had left bodies tangled in the roots and brush, their eyes wide and empty, their blood soaking into the mud like the island itself was drinking it in. I didn't waste time looking too long. If you started seeing them as people, as anything more than just another part of the war, it got harder to pull the trigger when it mattered. Reeves crouched beside me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "You hear that?" he muttered. I listened. The wind had shifted, carrying with it a scent that didn't belong. Smoke. Not just gunpowder or the stink of burnt flesh. This was different. What? Fuel. Something was burning. "They're up to something," I said. "They don't pull back for nothing." Reeves nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "We need to find out what. Get ready to move." We didn't have to wait long. The order came down from command a few minutes later. Scout forward, find out what was happening past the tree line. We were down 5 men, and the ones still standing were running on fumes, but there wasn't a man among us who even considered saying no. We moved in a loose line, stepping carefully, every footfall measured. The jungle wasn't just trees and vines, it was alive with things that didn't want to be seen, things that waited for you to step just a little too far off the path. I gripped my rifle tight, my knuckles white, and tried not to think about the stories we'd heard. The patrols that never came back. The bodies found gutted and torn, not by bullets or blades, but something else. The smell grew stronger. And then we saw it. Through the trees, past the heavy curtain of jungle, a glow flickered against the night, a fire, burning low but steady. We crept forward, staying low, every muscle in my body screaming to run, to stop, to turn back. And then the jungle ended. And I saw what was waiting for us. The fire burned in the center of a clearing, small and controlled, casting long, stretching shadows across the ground. Around it, figures stood in silence, their backs to us, their heads bowed. Japanese soldiers, but something was wrong. They weren't armed, not like before. Their rifles were stacked neatly against a tree, untouched. Some of them weren't even wearing helmets. They just stood there, unmoving, watching the flames. And at their feet, I felt my stomach turn. Bodies, laid out in a perfect row, faces covered, arms folded over their chests. Just ours. Civilians, maybe. It didn't matter. Reeves cursed under his breath. What the hell is this? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing for sure. We weren't supposed to see this. And now that we had, we weren't getting out of here without a fight. I didn't breathe. None of us did. The clearing stretched before us like something out of a fever dream, the flickering firelight painting the scene in hues of deep orange and shadowy black. The Japanese soldiers stood still, almost ritualistic in their silence, heads bowed, eyes locked on the flames as though they were looking at something we couldn't see. Their weapons remained untouched, stacked neatly against the base of a gnarled old tree, a detail that should have given me some comfort, but instead, it only made my skin crawl. Soldiers didn't abandon their weapons in the middle of a war zone. They didn't stand with their backs exposed, vulnerable, indifferent to the fact that we were right there, close enough to take them all out before they could blink. I clenched my rifle tighter, fingers slick with sweat, and glanced at Reeves. His jaw was set, his breath slow and steady, but I saw it. The same hesitation crawling up his spine, the same question tightening his grip on his sidearm. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. We had fought these men tooth and nail through the jungle, heard their battle cries, felt their bullets bite through our lines, watched them die with hate in their eyes. But this was something else. The bodies at their feet were laid out too perfectly, their arms folded, their faces covered, lined up as if they were waiting for something. Some of them were ours, men we had lost, faces I recognized even in the dim light. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting into knots that I didn't have time to unravel. The Japanese didn't treat their enemies dead like this. Hell, we barely had time to bury our own, let alone set them out like fallen kings. So why were they doing this? The jungle around us seemed to shrink, the towering trees pressing in closer, their branches arching overhead like twisted fingers. I wanted to move. I wanted to pull back, to tell Reeves that whatever this was, it wasn't our fight anymore. But then something changed. One of the Japanese soldiers stirred, his head tilting slightly, like he had finally sensed us there in the dark. The movement was slow, too slow, like a man waking from a deep sleep. His hands twitched at his sides, his breath hitching in his chest, and then, as if drawn by some unseen force, he turned to face us. His eyes weren't right. Even in the dim firelight, I could see it, the glassy, unfocused sheen, the way his pupils swallowed the irises, dark pools that reflected the flames but held no recognition, no fear, no anger. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. He just looked at me like he was seeing something that wasn't there. Then another turned, and another. One by one, the soldiers in the clearing lifted their heads, their movement slow and unnatural, like puppets on invisible strings. They didn't reach for their weapons, didn't call out an alarm, didn't react the way any man should have when confronted with enemies crouching just yards away. Instead, they simply stood, their bodies rigid, their faces unreadable. A shiver ran down my spine, but before I could even process what was happening, something else changed. The fire dimmed. Not in the way a flame should when it burns low, not like a gust of wind had passed through and stolen its strength. It just shrank, like the light itself was being pulled away, leaving only a weak, struggling glow that barely reached the edges of the clearing. The shadows deepened, stretching longer, twisting unnaturally against the trees, and with them came a sound, low and distant, a murmur that wasn't quite a whisper but wasn't a voice either. It slithered through the thick air, threading itself between the rustling leaves, wrapping around the stillness of the clearing like a presence unseen but deeply felt. Reeves tensed beside me, his breath sharp. "We need to get the hell out of here," he whispered, and for the first time since I had known him, there was something in his voice I had never heard before. Fear. I nodded, my grip tightening on my rifle. We had seen enough. Whatever this was, it wasn't war, not in the way we understood it. There was something else at work here, something we weren't meant to be a part of. But just as we started to inch back, just as I let out the breath I had been holding, one of the Japanese soldiers moved. Not a step, not a twitch, something worse. His head snapped to the side, violently, unnaturally, the crack of bone loud in the suffocating silence. Then another did the same. Then another. One by one, their heads twisted at impossible angles, their bodies jerking as if their very skin had suddenly become too tight. The murmuring grew louder, swirling around us, filling our ears with something that wasn't quite words but carried meaning all the same. And then the first one screamed. A raw, guttural, inhuman sound that clawed its way out of his throat, shredding the quiet, sending ice racing through my veins. It was followed by another, and another. The soldiers in the clearing convulsed, their bodies writhing, their limbs snapping into unnatural angles, and I knew with every instinct screaming in my brain that we weren't looking at men anymore. We turned and ran. The jungle didn't welcome us back. It swallowed us whole. The moment our boots left the clearing, the firelight behind us dimmed into nothing, as if it had never been there at all. The humid air thickened, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake, the branches above stretching and tangling like clawed hands reaching to pull us back. My breath came fast, shallow, but I didn't dare slow down. Not now. Not after what we had just seen. Reeves was ahead of me, his movements sharp and desperate, his rifle clutched so tight I thought he might snap it in two. The others were just shadows, blurred figures weaving between the trees, the crunch of leaves and snapping twigs, the only proof that we were all still here, that we hadn't lost anyone. Yet, that thought wouldn't leave my head. The jungle had a way of playing tricks on a man, twisting the world around you until you weren't sure what was real, and what was just another ghost lurking between the trees. And after what we had seen in that clearing, I wasn't sure which was worse, getting out here alive or finding out we hadn't really escaped at all. The screams still echoed in my ears. Not gunfire, not the sharp, panicked shouts of soldiers in battle, but something else. Something unnatural. Something that had no place in this war. I had seen men die, seen them torn apart by bullets, grenades, bayonets. But whatever had happened back there in that clearing, it wasn't war. It wasn't men against men. It was something else entirely. The jungle pulsed around us, alive with sounds that weren't supposed to be there. Footsteps, too many, too close. The rustle of leaves from something unseen, moving alongside us, keeping pace even though we were sprinting full force through the underbrush. And beneath it all, that low, whispering murmur, the same one we had heard around the fire. It slithered through the trees, curling around the trunks, crawling up my spine like cold fingers pressing against the base of my skull. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Looking back meant seeing them. Seeing their faces, their broken, twisted bodies, their two wide eyes filled with something that had no place in the eyes of the dead. Looking back meant acknowledging that they were following us, even though they shouldn't be, even though they couldn't be. Reeves skidded to a stop, so suddenly I nearly slammed into him. His hand shot up, signaling the rest of us to halt. I sucked in a breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to break free. "What the hell are you?" I started, but then I saw it. The trees had changed. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, the adrenaline warping my vision, the darkness twisting the jungle into something worse than it already was. But no, the trees were different. The trunks were thicker, their bark pale and smooth like bone. Their branches stretched unnaturally high, tangled together overhead, blocking out the moon entirely. The air was heavier here, thick with a scent that was wrong. Rotting wood, damp earth, something sickly sweet that clung to the back of my throat. "We didn't come this way," Reeves muttered, his voice tight with something close to panic. I swallowed hard, gripping my rifle even though I knew, deep down, that bullets wouldn't do a damn thing against whatever had lured us here. Lured. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. We hadn't been running away. We had been running straight into something worse. A sound broke through the silence then, a sharp, wet crack, like bones snapping under pressure. It came from behind us. No, not behind. Above. Slowly, too slowly, I tilted my head upward, and I saw them. They were hanging from the branches, their limbs twisted and broken, their bodies limp but their eyes still open, still watching. Soldiers, Japanese, American, men who had fought and died on this island. But they weren't dead. Not really. Their mouths moved, soundless, their lips forming words I couldn't hear, couldn't understand. Their fingers twitched, reaching, beckoning. And then, all at once, they began to move. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. I don't remember firing my rifle, but the sharp, deafening crack of gunfire filled the air as I stumbled backward, my boots slipping in the thick mud. Reeves was shouting something, his voice lost beneath the chaos, the others already turning to run, their faces pale and wild with terror. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck, and I knew without a doubt, that if I turned around, if I looked, I wouldn't be looking at a man anymore. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until the jungle blurred into nothing, until the world itself seemed to collapse around me in a haze of darkness and whispered voices. And when I woke, when my eyes finally forced themselves open, I was back at camp. The others were there too, sprawled out on the ground, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, their eyes hollow and dazed. But the thing that chilled me the most, the thing that still haunts me even now, even after all these years, was the silence. No one spoke. No one asked what had happened. Because deep down, we already knew. And some things are better left unspoken.